Hey guys, this is Nick Christopher from Mob Tales. Hope you guys doing well. Sorry we skipped about a week because we had a little difficulty. Um, Today, I'd like to welcome back a gentleman who grew up around the life, wrote a great book called Wise Guy. Um, and even though we had him on before, but we wanted to do a new version, better version of the show. So Louis Divita, thanks a lot. Thank you very much for your patience and coming back on again.
Sure. Thank you, Nick.
Anytime. Um, well, just to give people a little familiarity with your background, um, Lou came from the grew up around his life, the life with his grandfather, his uncle Ernie. They were around guys like Willie Moretti, Jerry Catena, to name a few, in the Genovese crime family. Um, so Lou grew up around that in a big way. So Lou, just if you can give us a little bit of a taste of your early, very when you were very young, when you weren't really familiar with what was going on. Um, Maybe give us a taste of that from the beginning.
Well, my grandfather, let's give you some background that way, okay?
Sure.
My grandfather's brother was Angelo Palmieri, and he was the boss in Buffalo
Hmm.
Niagara Falls. And during Prohibition, he and his brother Paul, my grandfather, controlled all the liquor coming in through Canada into the United States. And they distributed through to the Great Lakes, all the Great Lakes cities, and down into New York City. And of course, the liquor was coming in other directions as well, but the stuff that was coming in from Canada was coming through their pipeline. Okay,
Hmm.
and in the my grandfather actually he was a gambler, and he won a funeral home in a poker game, and he ended up becoming no, really he became a funeral director. But he wanted to secure his position in the funeral business. So he tried to get Uncle Ernie to go to school to get a mortician's license. Ernie says, "No way, I'm not doing it." And in the old Italian families, the screaming, the yelling, the agonizing. And my mom finally said, "Look, stop it. I'll go, I'll get the license," which she did. And she became a licensed mortician in the state of New York for him to have the funeral home. Well, as time went on, Stefano Magaddino had become boss, and there was a jealousy factor there. I mean, there's no other way to say it. There was a jealousy factor, and things were
Oh,
not
between you mean between your grandfather and Magadino?
Magaddino. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
Magaddino was the boss. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But my
Yes.
grandfather was a liaison. He was uh, close with, and I will talk more about that in a little bit. But he was close with everybody from all the different families. Um,
Hmm.
and very well liked, very well thought of. So my grandfather and Willie Moretti had become very, very close friends years prior when Willie was in Niagara Falls, Buffalo, running crap games. And Willie was now underboss to Frank Costello.
Hmm.
And Willie called my grandfather. He said, "Look," he says, "there's going to be problems." He said, "Get your ass out of there. Get down here. We got a place for you. We want you down here with us." And that's what he did. He packed up everything and he moved down to New Jersey, and that's where he settled in. Um, and that's how that whole thing transpired. Um, and when I talk about respect, my grandfather died in 1955 from a heart attack, natural causes. And it was 1967, if I believe, when Frank Costello came over on a Sunday morning. This is after he was supposedly retired. Okay. And he came
Supposedly.
over, he came over and sat with my grandmother, and he said, "There's no more envelopes coming." He said, "I'm sorry, but the younger guys they just won't back it anymore." So for all those years, every Friday afternoon, there was a knock on the door. And remember, so I was, like I said, I was 7 years old when my grandfather died, and I'd be at my grandmother's on a Friday, and from 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, I'd open up the door, and Mr. Scomo, one of the local guys, would be standing there. Hello, would you give this to your grandmother, please? Would you give this to your grandmother, please? It was always, and it was nice. But prior to my grandfather dying, I had a little bit of time that I was able to spend with him. He used to take me with him to a lot of his meetings, and he would tell me, sit up at the counter over there and get yourself a soda or an ice cream or whatever. And he'd go in the back and there'd be a meeting, or it'd be a delicatessen, and he'd go in the back and there'd be a meeting. And it wasn't until I became an adult and I realized, yeah, he loved me. He liked being around me. He wanted to spend time with me, but also I was a decoy, if you will. I mean, here's an old man, walking around with his little grandson. Doesn't cast any interest to anybody, and he could go any place and meet with people. And there was another friend of his that he had, a man by the name of Mr. Pepitone. Mr. Pepitone was a very frail little man, um, very polite and what have you. And my grandfather used to take him to a lot of different meetings and stuff because, again, he was a diversion. You see these two old men traveling together, you're not going to think too much. If you see a bunch of guys that look the part, then it would cast aspersions. So anyway, like I say, we were able to spend some time together, and a lot of good memories. I have a picture in my book of him standing on the front porch of our house. That I actually took that picture with one of the Brownie cameras. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the Brownie cameras,
Mhm.
but I had one of those, and he was giving me. He didn't want me to take his picture, but I talked him into it, and he let me take that picture. And then right after he died, I started spending a lot of time with my grandmother. And that's when I really started to get the family history and the background and really learn about where we came from, what the whole family was about, etc. And that went on through my early teens, I would say. And then by the time my early teens came around, Uncle Ernie took me under his wing and he started to teach me the ways of the world, so to speak. And I wanted that life so bad. I can't tell you how bad I really wanted it. But I guess I was around 20 years old, 19 or 20 years old, when I realized that I did not want that world. And what actually happened was Ernie was involved in some stuff that was really on the cusp of getting him into some deep trouble. And my mother was very, very observant and very wise. And she said, I want you to just stay clear for a little bit. She said, you don't have to stay away altogether, but I want you to stay clear, which I did. And I took a job selling clothes, just to pick up some holiday money in a men's clothing store. And while I was selling clothes, this guy came in and I fitted him in. He was a hard to fit guy, and I fitted him in some shirts, and we ordered shirts for him. And he said, "Do you ever think about selling cars?" And I said, "No, I don't think I'm old enough." I said, "I'm only 20." And he says, "No." He says, "You're old enough." He said, "What's your day off?" I told him. He said, "Come on in." He said, "I want you to meet my partner." So I did. The next thing you know, I was in the car business. Now, this is in 1969. My first week in the car business, I made $500. And for those people that don't know how much 500 was, go online and do the conversion factor, and you'll see.
Yeah,
Well, it
that
was
was
it
pretty
was.
good.
Oh, pardon me.
69.
Yeah, it
Five
was
hundred
it was
dollars for 69, pretty good.
yeah, and it was like I put a spike of heroin in my arm. I was addicted. That was it. And when I woke up to the fact, I said, "Well, wait a second now. I can hang out with my uncle and get 250, 300 a week and take a chance of getting clubbed over the head, stabbed, shot, whatever. Uh, I'm over here, I'm making 500. Now, I didn't make 500 every week. I don't want you to think I did, okay? There were $300 weeks and 400s and 200s and back to 500 again. But uh, they gave me a new car to drive. They had paid the gas. They gave me health insurance. I wore a suit and tie every day to work. What the hell do I want to do this other stuff for? And
Mhm.
it was maybe a couple of years later when my uncle came to me and he said, "We got a spot for you." I said, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" He says, "Well, we're going to put you to work in a factory." I said, "A factory?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "So you get your factory pay." And I think they were going to give me another 200 a week or 250, whatever it was. I don't even remember the exact amount now. And what you need to do is you need to talk up the union to these guys in there. And then we'll come in and get a vote. So once again, uh, I did my investigating and my homework, and it wasn't the way they made it sound. I mean, it was a dangerous position because you're going into these factories where you got guys been working there 25, 30 years. They're very happy with the way the factory, the way they're being treated, and somebody like me would be an agitator, and they don't like agitators. So now what happens is you come walking around the row of lockers one day and you catch a pipe wrench in the back of the head. Now, I was able to take care of myself when people were coming on me face to face, one on one. But you start putting two on one, three on one, whatever. It's not like you see in the movies. I mean, that stuff, in the movies, you got 30, 40 guys coming at one guy and he ends up the victor. It doesn't happen in real life. So I said thanks, but no thanks. But the whole time that I was in the car business and I had other business interests and I had other stuff, uh, I had some other deals going on. And anytime that somebody from that life, whether it was my uncle or other people that I knew from there, they needed something, I was always, able to accommodate them and help out in any way that I can, always with the caution of not getting myself in too deep.
Well, now Ernie was your uncle on your mother's side or your father's side?
My mother's side, my
Mother's
mother's
side. Okay. So in reality, it's your mother's side that was where their generation or that side of the
yeah,
family was the one that was involved in the life, so to speak.
my dad's family had a saloon and a restaurant in Niagara Falls. And after my dad got married, after they got married, my mom didn't want to live in Niagara Falls, so he moved to New Jersey. And his youngest brother, and his mother continued to run the saloon for whatever number of years. And my father, when he came down right after the wedding, went to work for Willie. He was driving. He was driving, and he was handling stuff in the wire room. In those days, they had the wire room where they were taking the bets.
Hmm.
And my father would work the phones during the day, and he'd drive for them at night. They had dice barns in New Jersey. So what would happen is they'd get phone calls from people in New York that they wanted to get picked up. He'd go pick them up, bring them out to the dice barn. They gamble, take them back to New York. So it was all kinds of money flowing around in all different directions. But frankly, my dad wasn't cut out for it. He did not like carrying a gun. He did not like constantly looking over his shoulder and always having the threat of stuff because as safe as they were in so many ways, they weren't safe. There's a story about Willie and Pete LaPlaca. Pete was Willie's driver bodyguard and later became the captain in northern New Jersey. Um, they came out of the Lincoln Bar in Passaic, New Jersey, and a car came around the corner shooting, and the two of them just got down on one knee and just started shooting back at him. I mean, it was they had balls made out of titanium. I mean, it was just they didn't duck for cover, they just started shooting. And my dad just wasn't cut out for that, you know.
Well, since you're being, you're around your grandfather and then your Uncle Ernie, um, what kind, like, you said that you were around them, and did you see any, I mean, did you experience any part of that life that, because from what I do understand, you were a little bit motivated to get involved in it on some level. But of course, like you backed off, obviously, but there was some bit of a fascination with it. Um, can you tell us where that came from? Was it the cars? Was it the jewelry? Was it the places they went to? I mean, that's what happened to me. But was that similar? Was it in that fashion?
All of the above.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
but it took me a while to wake up to the fact, and I wrote about this. When things are going good, everybody's walking around flexing their chests are puffy and their shoulders are back, and Cadillacs are all over the place. But then there's a setback. For whatever reason, the setback happens to come, and all of that goes out the window. So I experienced the hard times as well as the good times. And well, I'll just detour for a second.
Hmm.
The 1980s, I was running a Chrysler store in Garfield, New Jersey. And one of the guys that came in there, he was a bookmaker. We became friends and helped him out with a few things. And he basically would get pinched, do a year, 2 years, whatever, come out. The money by the money he paid the attorneys, by the money his wife had to go through to survive until he came back out of the can, he'd have to start all over again. And he said to me, and this is probably around 1985, 86, 87, somewhere in there. He said, if I could get a $60,000 a year job, he said, I wouldn't fool around with this anymore. So that was a perfect example of the goods, the bads, the ups, the downs, etc.
Hmm.
You know,
Sure.
and I don't know about your personal experiences other than what I've read that you've written, but I'm sure you know a lot of people that are identical to what I'm talking about. They have a real good, they make a couple of good scores, they have a couple of good years. They don't even have to do time. All of a sudden that money runs out and they can't make another score for a while. So they're scrambling, you know. It's
Yeah,
here today and gone tomorrow. So it's
pretty
it's
much.
it's it's not a regular life. But
No, no.
from the time I was about 17 till I was about 20, Ernie was actually in exile, which is a whole nother story. And when he came back, when everything smoothed over and he came back, that's when we started to really run together hard. But during that time, I had hooked up with some other local people, and I was doing some collecting for bookmakers, and that was a learning experience in and of itself. And I did other stuff for them as well, but the primary function I had was collecting. And one of the things I like to talk about is when it's collecting money, because again, it's portrayed as you know everybody getting beat up and banged up, and honest to
Hmm.
God, I never had to rough anybody up. I mean, first of all, they know why you're there. They know who you're representing. And it's just a matter of how much am I going to get to? I know I'm not getting it all today. So how much am I going to get today? And you just go on down the road. But and I think that was probably my biggest lesson in posture and image. And I talk about that in my book. You have to present yourself in a certain way. If you present yourself in a certain way, and coupled with, again, they know where you came from and what you're there for, um, it's a whole different thing than what I think most people think of when they think of somebody out collecting money. So
Well, when you were doing that, that was on behalf of who?
local bookmakers, they
All
they
right, but
were
so
they
they were kicking up to somebody else.
yeah, they were kicking up. There were the Cavalcanti guys working in the area, and
Hmm.
there were, of course, the Genovese guys had the stronghold on that area. But Gambino had a few people working in the area. The Cavalcanti had a few
Hmm.
guys working in the area. Um, there was one Colombo guy that he was basically operating out of Fort Lee, Leonia, Teaneck area, but he would filter down into Fairlawn, Garfield, it was East Patterson in those days. Now it's called Elmwood Park. And I would run into him.
So did
So
you? So basically, you were operating, so to speak, in the Garfield area.
yeah, Garfield. It was Bergen County. Bergen County. Bergen
Bergen
County.
County. Okay.
Bergen County is everything from Garfield. My hometown was Fairlawn. You had Elmwood Park. You had Ridgewood. Ridgewood was more lily white, but believe it or not, there were some people we had to go pay a visit to in Ridgewood. I mean, yeah,
Well, I mean, with that experience, um, I mean, I'm sure you made a nice little nickel and dime. I'm sure you did pretty decently. Um, being that the case, and I'm like you said, I'm sure you were making some decent money, especially at that age. Even though you were like I think 20, like you said,
yeah,
um, it's still a tender age where it's at that age, it's easy to get caught up in it. Like, oh wow, I can make this money. I'm not really doing it. I'm not busting my ass. I'm not doing anything difficult. It's like a piece of cake. This is easy. Um, so some guys that were around that age, I get that start off doing. That's pretty much how you start off, more or
right.
less. Run here, run there, do that kind of stuff. Um, and it's sort of like a springboard into what you can do. A step on the ladder. Um, did so that being the case, did it did that didn't you stop? Did it ever a day where say like, you know what, hey, this is pretty good. I can make some pretty good money, and I'm not killing myself for it. You know, um, did that ever come across your mind, or did you eventually, like you said, kind of like wake up and say, hey, this ain't for me. Let me go this way.
Probably, every day you look at it as it could be an opportunity. Okay. And
Hmm.
I kind of think it's probably like every kid that plays football in high school fantasizes about his college career, and those in college fantasize about their professional career. And so it was kind of like the same thing in my life and what I went through. I don't know if you fantasize or you think about the next steps up, but I was very fortunate because again, I saw some hard times. I saw some guys that were very well thought of and respected take falls. And I was able to pick up on the fact that, again, in that life, you're generally going to end up one of two ways. you're gonna end up broke or dead, or in jail. I mean, it's just the way it is. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know of anybody, okay, and I'm sure there are people out there, okay, who came away with a lot of money. I know there's some guys out there that doing podcasts and what have you that, you know, financially they're well set. How they ended up that way, I don't know, but they're few and far between. Okay,
Mhm.
the bulk of the people that, and again, I'm 77 years old, so it's been a long time since I was, around anybody. But the people that I was around, those people, none of them really came out.
Right.
When I say
Well,
came out with any kind of
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
assets.
they weren't Meyer Lansky, uh,
No,
you know, or Carlo Gambino for that matter. Those guys, they survived. They, whatever, they passed away naturally, and they, who knows where their money went.
right.
Um, but nevertheless, um, like you said, you're at your age right now. You haven't been around that world in a long time. But I'm sure you, um, read about it, seen it on TV and in movies and stuff like that. Um, but you were upfront and personal with this, especially with your family, with your grandfather, your Uncle Ernie. Um, if you were to compare what people see, like you just said, like in the movies and The Sopranos, for example, right? Sopranos is perfectly Jersey, right there. Um, if you were to compare that with reality, how much of a despairing difference is it?
It's night and day, absolute night and day. Um, I when I watch certain movies, um, I look at all the stuff that doesn't make any sense. I give you two right off the bat.
Hmm.
Two of them both from The Godfather. When Salazzo goes to see him at his office, he looks like some broken down old man with a kind of a plaid shirt and a tie on. There's nobody that would have had the position that he had ever dressed like that. He would have been, he would have had, the way he was dressed when they had the big meeting with Bronzini and everybody, that's the way he would have been dressed every day. Okay. So it
Mhm.
just, that doesn't make sense. The other scene is, I think it's in Godfather 2, where it's the final scene and they're sitting around the table and it's his birthday and Tessio comes in with the cake
Mhm.
and they're talking about the Japs just attacked Pearl Harbor. That's a Sunday. He would not have been out by himself on a Sunday morning. He would have either been in church with his family or home with his family. So these are the kind of things that technically they just don't register with me. Okay.
Right.
Um, as
Well,
far,
The Godfather obviously is fiction. It's not a
yeah,
real story. But if you were to compare things like Goodfellas, Donnie Brasco, um, that are based on, even though I know that those films weren't accurate. Accurate meaning they weren't the real stories, the real story of those individuals. Um, and I can punch holes in it myself, but they were based on true stories compared to The Godfather, which we know is fiction. So, with fiction, they do whatever they want. They can go any way direction. But when it comes to something that's real, which I'm sure you've seen them, um, how close are they?
I don't think I've seen anything that I can really say is that they're all glamorized. Okay. And let me detour again. Um, I did a pilot for a mini series based on my book. And I submitted it to some people. And like everybody else that's ever written a book, everybody's trying to, do a mini series or a feature or whatever. And a couple of the so-called experts that I spoke to, they said, well, you got to fictionalize it. I said, no, I said, the story is the story. I don't want to fictionalize it. And I've heard from some people that I did not know any of these people personally, but did know Henry Hill and that crew. And they said that there was a lot of fictionalization that went on in that movie.
Oh, yeah,
You know, it
100%.
was
No doubt about it. Ray
it was,
Liotta made him look like a king.
yeah, and it was all overly glamorized. Okay, and you know, one of the things that I say all the time is most of the made guys. I mean, there's a lot of guys that want to consider themselves spice guys, but the made guys that I've been around, they're very boring people. Very boring people. They this is one thing that in the movies that does depict, I think, accurately. They hang out in a club someplace. They drink coffee until whatever time. Then they start drinking whiskey until whatever time. And then they might go out to a bar or a club or whatever. And that's their life. That's how they live their lives. Okay. And I go out of my mind if I just had to sit around all day like that. But to them, you know, they might spend, might play a little cards or whatever. So it's, you know, that's something that they do depict. I think that's been pretty accurate from the people that I had been associated with and been around. And, you know, it was another reason, you know, a lot of times they want you to just hang around, just to hang around. And what, hang around for what? Okay. I want to live my life and I want to make some money. That's what I want to do. So I don't know. It's you
Well,
know, but
their money's working for them in some level. That's why they don't got to move a finger.
yeah, their money's out on the street. So
Right.
somebody
Exactly.
else is hustling for them. You know,
Yeah,
but
pretty much.
no,
Um,
pretty much everything that I've seen in the movies from my own personal experiences, uh, and from people you know that I've heard firsthand from, not necessarily my personal experiences, but from people I've heard from firsthand, are
mm.
just overly exaggerated.
Well, I mean, your book is quite interesting, and um, what motivated you to put this book together about your true experiences? I mean, you're talking about your family, um, which a lot of, even though it's been done by some other authors who've written about their family and growing up around their life. Um, what motivated you to do this? I mean, this is very late in your life that you decided to do this. Was there a particular reason that you waited this long, or was it because you were waiting? You wanted to do it after everybody passes away, so you don't hurt, you don't hurt anybody. Was there any particular reason?
The original motivation came from my oldest cousin, who is a female, who said to me, I forgot where we were or what the circumstances were, but she
Mhm.
said, Louis, you know all the stories. You need to write them down for the younger generation. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And I started writing stories, okay, which a lot of them are in the book. Not all of them are in the book. And I talk about that too. I told the stories I wanted to tell, not all the stories, for personal reasons. And as I was doing it, I said, you know, this is pretty interesting. And maybe I should, you know, turn it into a book. And that's how that whole thing started to develop. But again, there was the thing about people being alive, and I didn't want to cast any stuff on anybody that. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. My uncle Frank. Now, Uncle Frank was my mother's youngest brother. Uncle Frank married Willie's oldest daughter.
Oh, Willie Moretti.
Right.
Right.
Uncle Frank and Uncle Ernie ran a luncheonette where they took action. And that went on for quite a while. After that, they got involved in several legitimate businesses, but they were always taking action on the side. Okay. Ernie went full bore. Frank stayed very, very low key. Frank stayed so low key that he finally took his college education and he actually became a teacher. And then eventually he went into the bathing suit business and did extremely well manufacturing bathing suits. But that's another story.
What a far cry from not taking action. Holy.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But there's circumstances that dictate why you do things, when you do them, etc. But a college friend of his was a doctor, and he came to Uncle Frank and told him his brother had a company that manufactured cleaning products, and they were trying to get it on supermarket shelves. So Uncle Frank knew that Gene and Jerry Katina were the way to go. So he put the whole deal together. And there were some A&P managers that wanted to put the stuff on the shelf, and they blew up the one A&P and they killed another guy. And of course, Uncle Frank got called in, and he had to testify before the Senate hearings and what have you. Nothing ever happened, and I've got that in the book, and we talk about that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not something that Uncle Frank wanted to rehash if he could avoid it. So if he were alive, I mean, I wouldn't want to have him, you know,
Mm-hmm.
see that. But I think it's important, and also to point out that he was just trying to make a buck wherever he could. He wasn't looking to do anything outrageous. I mean, these guys had, as there is a lot of legitimate business that the mob, if you will, or the underworld, whatever terminology you want to use, has influence and can definitely help you make money. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So
Yeah,
he in his mind wasn't doing anything wrong, but the whole thing blew apart, with the bombing and the killing and all that stuff.
literally
Yeah,
blew apart.
literally blew apart, right?
Literally. Um, well, before we get into the ending of the show soon, um, when being around these guys, and doing a little bit of bookmaking, like you said, and I believe this is true. Maybe you may agree, because it happened to me. I think being around these guys, even though they're not doing the right thing, I mean, they're criminals. Let's be blunt. But would you say being around them and learning a little bit of the street life, so to speak, that helped you? Would you say it helped you to um, be a better salesman, uh, be successful at what you do? Um, would you say some of that experience, or that you could take a little bit away from, take a little bit from that it helped you in some capacity?
Absolutely. The things that one of the first things I learned is, and I subscribe to it today, don't trust anybody. And I mean, it's as simple as that. I've
Yeah.
had, and I've violated that rule, and I've gotten burned. Never to anything serious, but it
Hmm.
just reinforces why I was told that and why it holds true. Because very few people can really stand up when the heat is on. Okay, so
I
that's
agree.
that I think helped me in a lot of ways going forward in life. But learning how to read people, I think, is huge. And you have to know what they're thinking before they're actually thinking it. And that made me a good salesman. You have to know when somebody's flat out blowing smoke, and that happens, on a regular basis. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
but you smile, you nod, you thank them, and then you just decide how you're going to go back at it and deal with it. But yes, absolutely. Um, and the amazing thing is, I think I probably learned more from the people that I was around than they knew themselves, because they just didn't, they weren't practicing what I was actually learning from them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you acted like a sponge. You just took
Yeah,
whatever you can, right?
I took it, and then they're
Mm.
going off, and they're not even practicing what they preach, so to speak. You know, I can't remember his name now, but he's an author, and he wrote a piece, and he put in there what part he was writing about some guys that they got pinched, and he says, "What part of keeping your mouth shut don't you understand?" And it's just so true. They all preach about keeping their mouth shut, but then they go and they tell everybody. I was in a situation here in Florida many years ago, and there were some old time Gambino guys all gathered together, and I ended up walking out of the room. They were just talking about some stuff that they had done that I just didn't even want to hear the details on it. And it'd be kind of like you talking about a touchdown you scored in your Thanksgiving game in high school. It's just to them that was their lives, and they wanted to talk about it. But again, I'm safe. You can talk in front of me, but how can you? I mean, you never know who's going to be in the room listening. And some of that stuff. There's no the statute of limitations does not run out.
Yeah,
So
well, it depends on what it is, especially
yeah,
on murder.
it was very gory. Let's put it that way.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Um, well, for people to know where to find your book, and if you do have a website, if you can share it with us, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's a wiserguy.com, and some of it is not functioning the way it should, unfortunately. We have a video that it was a book trailer that we put together, and I'm trying to get that back up and going. The guy that put that together has disappeared on me, so it's been a little difficult in getting that redone. But the website is up. There's some good stuff on there, and Amazon is where you can find the book. We have it in hardcover, soft cover, um, Kindle, and we have an audio book as well. Um, I had somebody actually do the audio. I was going to do it myself, but there's a technique to doing audio, and you have to have the right equipment to cut it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I heard, and it came out. I think it came out really good for people that want to, don't want to have to turn pages and they can listen in the car or whatever.
Yeah, the lazy people.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I call them.
But yeah, we've had some good response to it. A lot of people have commented on it, and yeah, I mean, I love it when people write reviews. And or one of the things, I used to have a Facebook page, but I've been banned from Facebook, and I have no idea why. I've tried everything to get back on.
Because you're a wiser guy. That's why.
No, I honestly, I think what happened was I had a few different pages for different businesses and other stuff, and somebody told me if you have too many, they shut you down. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I haven't been able to get
Maybe.
on. But
maybe.
I had about 28, 2,900 followers when I was doing a Wiser Guy Facebook page. And
Mm,
we were doing some really good posts on that. And between the Facebook page and the book itself, I was contacted by people that had some kind of tie to somebody that I wrote about. And
mm,
they wanted to discuss the person that I wrote about. And one of the most interesting is I wrote about Santo Volpe. Santo
oh,
Volpe,
yeah.
okay? Santo
Oh,
Volpe was the Boston Buffalo, the predecessor
Buffalo.
to Russ Buffalo. Excuse me, in Pittston, Pennsylvania, the
Hmm.
predecessor to Russ Buffalino. Okay, and in the summer months, I used to go out to Pittston and stay with his one of his daughters and son-in-law for a couple of weeks. And then we go up to a lake house that one of the brother-in-laws had, and it was just nice to spend time out there, with them. Well, somebody saw the name on the book, and they knew my parents, who happened to be um, the couple that I stayed with, Etor and Angela, their oldest son's wife, who I never met. So she bought the book and she reached out and contacted me. And she said, nobody of the kids knew, and this I find almost impossible to believe, that Mr. Volpe was who he was. Okay. So
Uh-huh.
it's like, again, it's like almost impossible. Well, he owned several coal mines. And so from that standpoint, he was as legitimate as you could get. But that was one contact I had, and then there were several others. So it's always nice when somebody reaches out and contacts me and wants to talk about
Of
something.
course.
Because, you know,
Well, to end the show, I wanted to ask you one last question. In your opinion, I mean, a lot of people, I kind of know what you might say with this question, but um, depending how much you may follow it or know about it, but from your upbringing and because I'm sure it's a lot different than what it is now. Do you think the mob, the mafia, or whatever you want, like you said, whatever terminology you want to use, um, do you believe it's like on its way out, so to speak?
no, no, I think it's going through a renaissance. I think it's probably in a totally different format than it was. Uh, I don't believe it will ever be what it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or even the 80s, to be honest with you.
Hmm.
I think the 70s and the 80s were very, very detrimental to what had been built since 1920s. Okay, I think the guys that were in power in the 70s and the 80s did everything they could to destroy it. Um, and younger people today don't have the same personality and the same makeup of what those guys had. I mean, you were dealing with a lot of real stand-up people those days. I don't
Hmm.
think you have that anymore. They might, because again, I'm not privy to that, but it's just from what I do read and what I do pick up on. I don't think that those guys are out there. And as far as flipping, I mean, let's face it. Um, there's some guys that flipped, and I honest to God, I can't blame them. Uh, I mean, when somebody takes away your livelihood while you're waiting trial, you know, I mean, you got to think long and hard. What did I get myself into over here? And that's one guy that you know of. And there's several others. So
Hmm.
because of the way things have gone, And the fact that Rico, the guys that were having that conversation I told you about earlier that I walked out on,
Yeah.
one of them told me point blank when he came out of jail, that's when he came to Florida. Because his lawyer told him, he said, there's a new law, it's called RICO. And he explained to him what it was. And he said, that's it for me. Came to Florida and started a whole, he was always dabbled and always had his fingers in, but way different than when he was, operating in New York.
Yeah, probably
So,
not the only one.
in answer to your question, no, I think it'll continue on indefinitely. Um, One of the things that probably hurt them more than anything was Giuliani. And from the standpoint of he went after them so hard, he just opened up the door for all the other groups to come in and take a foothold. And I think that's one of the things that took away some of their sting. But
Yeah.
I have a couple of friends of mine. They're younger than I am, and they kind of keep me a little bit posted. From what I can gather, there's still a lot of activity going on. Different activity from what I saw and what I was around, but there's still activity going on. So again, I went around and around to answer your question, but no,
That's all right. All
I don't
good.
think I don't think it's dead. I think it's again, it's not what it was, but it's there and it will continue on.
Well, Lou, thank you very much for coming on the show. And I know this one is going to be, this version was a lot better the last
Okay,
time. Um, and I like the audience to definitely check out your book, The Wiser Guy. I did, and I liked it. It was very good.
good. I'm glad.
Good story, very interesting, moves quickly. So guys, you just definitely have to check it out. Lou, thanks once again for coming on the show. Appreciate it. And I wish you luck.
Thank you much, Nick. Thank you.
No problem, buddy. Thank you.
Bye.